Welcome to the first episode of the podcast called Being Reintegrated. Now, this podcast is basically me going over a bunch of Elus Coen material. I've had people that wanted to know more about this, they want more teaching, and so that's what's going to be done. Now, normally I would do videos and you would see me talking through a situation, but we're not going to do that. What we're going to do now is we're going to talk, have a conversation, but as we talk, what's going to happen is I'm going to play voice-generated excerpts of books and papers that are previously unpublished. So you would normally not have access to this material, but I'm making it available. The first one is the treatise on blessings, which was published posthumously in the book about Saint Martin's Oeuvre and the information that came after his death. So what we're going to do is we're going to listen to this document, and then as it goes through these core concepts, I might pause to give a little bit of commentary, but this will be the easiest way for you to hear the content of the treatise that I'm talking about, which is called the Treatise of Benedictions, without going into a massive publication event where we have to have you buy the book, review the book, see if you like it. So this is an easier way for you just to go ahead and listen to it. So let's go ahead and try.
As nothing exists but through the virtues of blessings, it is very important to understand the true meaning of this word, as well as the different ways in which blessings operate on different species of beings, to vitalize them, to give them existence, and the continuation of this same existence. This word, translated in common languages by other words whose apparent meaning is to speak well, originates from Hebrew words that signify word of the sun, although the Hebrew word barak, which means blessing, has a different root and is derived from genuflection and the lowering of oneself before the one who blesses us, so that when wishing blessings upon someone, it is as if one were wishing that the sun speaks upon them, meaning that the eternal word itself spreads its virtues and powers upon them. Such is the true meaning of this venerable word, which the wise ancestors have perfectly understood. This is why throughout all times, they have directed their desires towards these salutary blessings, in which there is no being that does not find life, and outside of which there is nothing but death. But if nothing exists except through the virtues of blessings, as I have previously mentioned, and if these beings do not have the same existence, the same faculties, and the same purpose, and if, on the contrary, there is none that does not manifest differences in relation to other beings, it follows that they do not all receive the same kind of blessing, even though, nonetheless, they have nothing within them except through the virtue of blessings.
So you see, right now, Saint Martin goes into massive amounts of information about blessings. Also, you're going to hear in the future more information about these classifications of blessings. But the thing that was most important to listen to in that excerpt, which I don't know if the voice is appeasing or, pleasant to listen to as my voice, but basically what's happening is we're listening to his take on the apostolic blessing that is given. So these are the esoteric content of blessings and ordinations, the energy and beings that go behind that process, the metaphysics behind that process, how it ties into the rest of the order that Saint Martin wrote this about, which is the Elus Coen, how he ties in what blessings really are. And another name for blessings is barak for the Hebrew, but also anointing, or a kind of ordination that you'll hear of in a lot of different organizations. So this ordination that happens ordains you by the presence of these beings that he's talking about, that hopefully you'll be able to hear about.
Now, it is this difference in the virtues of beings, stemming from the difference in the blessings they receive, that we intend to examine. There are beings that are merely temporal, and there are those that are eternal. Therefore, there must also be temporal blessings and eternal blessings. Furthermore, within the temporal realm itself, there are beings that are purely physical or sensory, and there are those that are spiritual and intelligent. Hence, there must also be physical blessings and spiritual blessings. These three types of beings, along with their corresponding three types of blessings, correspond to the triple emanation or the universal ternary number representing the three divine faculties. It is because all these emanations are meant to manifest each of the divine faculties in particular that it is necessary for these divine faculties to manifest truly for the sustenance, life, and spiritual elevation of every emanated, emancipated, and created being. According to this principle, it is easy to see that each of the divine faculties corresponds to each of the three classes of existing beings. Action or operation relates to corporeal beings, will or intention relates to temporal spiritual beings, and pure thought itself relates to eternal spiritual beings.
So you see, Saint Martin is tying the faculties that you learn about in the Lessons of Lyon, the Treatise of Reintegration, and many other areas of Elus Coen literature into the actual beings that are part of those faculties. Now, we've heard this before, but it won't be until about 200 years later that we'll start hearing this through the anthroposophy of Rudolf Steiner in his work with the Theosophical Society of Germany. He starts to break down this inherited Rosicrucianism that you hear about in things like the Elus Coen. Now, what happens is Steiner goes about it another way, saying that our wills are not strong enough to take on concepts. So therefore, we must get to a feeling body first. The Elus Coen does it differently and says our feeling bodies and thoughts have led us astray. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our will in a divinely inspired way. And that way, the beings that are part of the will function will be able to come into our life and assist us more, so we can practice with our will more toward what they call the non nobis, the not for my own will, but for thine. So you see how Saint Martin is setting up the metaphysics of the orientation that you're going to get through later degrees. Now, this was given to Coens of the Temple. So he didn't give this lecture to those, well, he didn't give it to them at all, but he didn't write this lecture for those who were struggling through their proving period of the theurgical portion of the work. He was writing this to clarify what was happening in these degrees where the initiand was actually anointed.
Thus, corporeal beings being nothing more than the result of the spiritual operation of the divine faculties, this operation becomes an absolute necessity for their existence. If this operation were to cease for even a single moment, they would cease to be. Therefore, they must continually receive the influences of this divine spiritual operation. These influences, always directed and generated by the power of a word that corresponds to their purpose, are truly blessings or words of the Word, or of the Son himself, who, being the repository of all the powers of his Father, diversifies and employs them according to his wisdom and in accordance with the eternal laws of his justice and knowledge. It is therefore quite clear that the assembly of all corporeal things is indeed a continual blessing, since everything that occurs within it, both in general and in particular, is nothing but the very operation of one of the divine faculties. and this operation can only take place through words, all of which are generated and enlivened by the sole Word, or the eternal unity of divine essences. However, it must be acknowledged that the farther the productions deviate from the producing principle, the more intermediary beings are necessary to convey to them the spiritual influence or blessing that can alone animate them.
That's so important to understand. And this is why Martinez's system has so much genius to it. As a lot of you know, the argument of theodicy was something that went back all the way to the book of Job. The book of Job was about it, saying, how do these bad things happen to really good people? So what San Martin and Martinez, for that matter, were stating is that good things always happen in the realm of good. It's the misinterpretation of those things by the corrupt desire of human beings through the insinuation of spiritual forces that causes the good to become distorted and turns into a problem, to say the least. Now, we know this is true because now in 2023, we can go back to social science and see what some of the great social scientists have said, that mental illness is just an extreme of a useful faculty that's gone out of its bounds and usefulness. So we're starting to see the advent of psychology, especially moral psychology, coming into the group of Catholic mystics that Martinez and San Martin were working these ideas with, these metaphysics. Because at the time, in the 1700s, it was thought that if you just do the reasonable thing, then you will have a good life. And so reason will therefore get us out of the problem. And what Martinez came to say is that no, your thinking function and your feeling function has been distorted by these fallen beings. They fell because they have free will. They want to subjugate us because they want to feed off of the energy that we provide and also keep their own place. So when we go into this kind of theosophy, you got to understand that you must know the treatise of reintegration before you can go into something like this and look at the blessings of the separate beings and beneficial aspects of what San Martin is talking about here. But let's go ahead and continue.
In this respect, the inferiority of corporeal beings is evident. They are subject to receiving their bodily life only through the seed or germ of a material individual similar to themselves. Moreover, they continue to sustain their material life and growth only through the interaction with other corporeal substances that temper the destructive action of the central fire that produced them. This indeed demonstrates that matter carries the characteristics of the lowest and least powerful of the three universal creative faculties. Consequently, it should no longer be surprising that matter truly exhibits the ternary number as its essence and law throughout its existence, as well as in all the phenomena it presents to us. This third faculty, which is the very operation of the divine faculties for the fulfillment of the decrees of eternal justice, clearly teaches us the nature of matter or the universal temporal creation. It physically shows us that matter is nothing by itself, that it is merely an apparent being, which means it only exists through the action and life of the one charged with operating it. In truth, it could not be otherwise without distorting the spiritual and divine unity. If matter were real, it would necessarily be eternal. However, how can a non-spiritual being be both real and eternal, like the Spirit and like God? And if it were, wouldn't we be forced to consider that there are then two real beings and two gods?
Now, this is the statement that starts to separate Martinez and San Martin's theosophy from the Manichaean dualism that he's talking about. In the times of Zoroaster, they had basically two deities. One was a good one and one was a bad one. You had the Ahura Mazda and then you had the Ardaman. And what happened was as you served one, the other reduced in power. But as you serve a different, then the other will reduce in power. So it's a very binary system. The dark can't exist without the light, and the light can't exist without the dark, because the light is obtained by the subjugation of the dark, which creates what I like to call, quote, light mongering. And this is when a entity, we can call it the dramatis persona, or even a hero in a story, their entire arc depends on the villain doing the bad behavior for them to display this heroic behavior. Now, why is this important? Because the point is that these blessings are not just something that we get and then nothing happens bad, so to speak. What we'll hear later on in this book, this treatise, is that there's 3 types of blessings, and that destruction is actually a blessing. It's called the blessing of reintegration. And then you have the duration, and then you have the blessing of production. So what we're seeing here is very equivalent to the Eastern way of thinking about philosophy. When we go into the works of Nagarjuna, Nagarjuna in his Madhyamika philosophy, Madhyamaka, the fundamental verses of the middle way, he said that the way that things exist is that they can either exist or they cannot exist, or they can neither exist nor not exist together. And so we're talking about what gets further into the duration, the generation, and the cessation of all phenomena. That is what Saint Martin is talking about. Although he's not using those terms, he's calling them blessings of production, blessings of duration, and blessings of what they call reintegration, which is very interesting that the cessation of matter is called reintegration.
Because we would have to grant reality and eternity to 2 beings that are not of the same nature. On the other hand, given that matter or the universal creation exists and is alive only through the action and life of the spiritual being tasked with operating it, the existence of this matter is therefore the very sign, clear testimony, and living proof of the power and blessing that produces it. In a word, it demonstrates the reality of the one who operates it, as this reality is not inherent within the matter itself. If matter is nothing more than the result and product of the 3rd faculty, if it bears the ternary number in its origin, and if, at the same time, it only exists through its blessings like all beings, then the ternary number must also be evident in the blessings that bring it into existence and guide it. Moreover, there must be 3 actions or 3 blessings associated with the sustenance of temporal things. These are the blessings of production, the blessing of preservation, and the blessing of reintegration, which correspond to the 3 acts related to the birth, duration, and end of matter. As nothing exists.
So you see that this way of talking about matter is a very interesting way to classify it, due to the Aristotelian way of viewing in metaphysics. They saw these ways of matter as a change within one form to another. And these were what were talked about in the Stoicheion, and also in the manner of how things exist. There's a 4-fold way that things exist in Aristotelian philosophy. Well, this is the same thing, that even though we're not going into categories of existing of itself, ex nihilo, on and on and on, we're seeing that Saint Martin is presenting a clean way of looking at the system of the universe as a separate entity from the eternal. And that's what he's saying in this portion of the treatise of benedictions, is that the matter can't be all lasting. It can have a long duration because the blessing is there for us to experience our own temporal nature. But that doesn't mean that it's eternal, and that therefore doesn't mean we are eternal. So this disidentification and de-densification of the human being with their material body and material world is absolutely necessary to get into the aspect that is being talked about, which is reintegration, which we're going to hear later on in the treatise. But I just wanted to do this as a test so we could hear something a little different than me yammering on and on and on about how great books are. Maybe you can hear it for yourself.